I'm Colleen Scariano, and I'm one of the co-founders of SoulCore, and I'm a wife and a mother of 3, and recently started this endeavor, this journey with SoulCore in pairing the rosary with physical movement. What SoulCore is, it's a new movement that actually combines the prayers of the rosary with physical movement to help enhance our meditation, to reflect deeply on the mysteries of the rosary and the life of Christ and the virtues that we're supposed to pull from the rosary. I had been growing in my devotion to the Blessed Mother and praying the rosary more. I'd always had a love for athletics, but always had a difficult time sticking with workout routines. But I had started running, and I started praying my rosary when I ran, and I found it to be a beautiful time of deeper reflection. And I also found myself more motivated to run because I knocked out 2 things at one time, prayer and also the rosary. And so a friend of mine had said, as you age, we really should add core strengthening workouts to keep our bodies healthy.
I am Deanna Miller, and I am also a wife and mother of 4 children. And I'm actually brought up Greek Orthodox, 100% Greek. And obviously the Orthodox have a very strong devotion to Mary as well. For me at that time, the rosary was not necessarily a big part of my life, but in joining the Catholic Church, started praying it sort of because I thought I was supposed to.
And so I had thought, would it be beautiful to pair a core strengthening workout with the prayers of the rosary? And I did some research, and there was nothing like that out there. And so the inspiration came shortly after a pilgrimage to Medjugorje. My brother had encouraged me, he's a priest, and he had encouraged me to learn more about the Blessed Mother and grow in my relationship with her.
Colleen became so open to the faith after the death of our parents and brother that she had lots of questions. And one thing I encouraged her to do was to consecrate her life to Jesus through Mary. When I was in seminary, I did the 34-day total consecration to Jesus through Mary, which had a profound effect in my own life and spirituality. And when I was ordained a priest, I gave my life completely to our Blessed Mother, inspired by Pope John Paul II and Blessed Teresa of Calcutta, who really lived their life completely for Our Lady to be a gift to Jesus. And that had such a profound effect on me that I said, I want to share that with anybody who would be open to that. And so my sister was so open to the faith and said, Colleen, you really need to consecrate your life to Our Lady, to Jesus through Mary.
And so then he invited me on a pilgrimage to Medjugorje, which I did take, and it was a really profound time of growing closer in devotion to the Blessed Mother and connecting really more closely to Jesus through her. When I came back from that pilgrimage to Medjugorje, that was truly when I had this inspiration about pairing the prayers of the rosary with physical movement. And it was a fruit of that pilgrimage and that time spent growing closer to Jesus and Mary. I encountered some family tragedy that really drove me to kind of seek a deeper relationship with Christ. My mother died unexpectedly of a heart attack in 2010. And then just 2 months later, after my mom's death, my father and my brother actually died together in an accident. And so it was a profound time of tragedy for myself and for my family.
My sister Colleen actually is the one who called me quite hysterically because she had just discovered my dad and brother dead in the house on her property. And she called, and I could hardly understand what she was saying. All I heard through her mutterings was, I think they're dead, I think they're dead. And this was a profound tragedy and a huge shock.
I had this longing for missing my parents and that parental love, and it kind of drove me to seek a deeper relationship with the Blessed Mother, not just as a saint that we have reverence for, but really a maternal relationship. And so in learning so much about Mary and just the beauty that she is and the example that she is for all of us, I had a craving to know more. And so when I was invited on this pilgrimage, I just felt like, okay, this is what I have to do. And so it was a really beautiful time of kind of growing deeper in my faith. I'm number 5 of 6 children, and my mom was always a witness of love and faith. And faith was always the cornerstone of our family. Even growing up, my family had encountered a lot of tragedy. My oldest brother was actually struck by lightning and killed when he was 15. It kind of shattered our family unit as we knew it. And my mom really turned to her faith during that time, and just through Christ had so much healing and was strengthened to go on and care for her other children and be a wonderful mom.
My mom, I think, really was a light. She had a real saintly quality about her. And like anybody who arrives at a sanctity in their life, she had many sufferings. She suffered very much throughout her lifetime. But her suffering didn't turn to bitterness because it became purified through a love of Jesus Christ.
At the same time, my dad turned to alcohol, and then my second oldest brother, who was very close to my brother who was killed, it was a catalyst in their lives that created, such a wound and sorrow that they turned to alcohol and eventually became addicted.
My dad was a great dad with a great flaw. I do believe that the death of his son, my brother Dan, when he died, I think that profoundly affected him. With my brother Mike, I think his addiction really took hold after my brother Dan was killed. Mike was a great kid, but he was more of a follower. Dan was a leader, and Mike was like his best friend. And so when Dan died, Mike found himself without his brother and his best friend and a little lost.
So even my mom not only did she lose her firstborn child, but even my dad and my brother began that struggle with addiction. And so she was such a witness in how she handled that challenge, and she really persevered in prayer for many years, and by the grace of God, they each had miraculous recoveries and healings. 25 years down the road, so it was a long time of prayer, and there were many trials in between. So she was just, without words, she was this witness of how faith can carry us through even the darkest trials, the darkest tragedies. And so when I lost my mom and I lost my dad and my brother, it was what I knew. I knew from her example, not from her words, but her example of how she lived. And so that's what my remaining brothers and sisters did, was we really turned to our faith and we turned to that relationship with Christ. And the longing for that parental love, I think, is what drove me to really seek a deeper relationship with Mary. And that's the relationship she wants with all of us, very maternal and so personal with each person. And that's really become palpable in my life. And I count that as such a blessing, because of missing my earthly parents. I feel like I just have this great guidance from her, and obviously through her, growing closer to her son, Jesus. When any of us suffer a tragedy and suffering, I think we don't necessarily know how to cope with it. And that's really where having our faith, being able to turn to that through Jesus' death and then his resurrection, there's always that hope that evil, that tragedy, that suffering does not triumph, that in the end, life, and goodness triumphs. And so I think, especially through our Catholic faith, that's the basis of our Catholic faith.
I really believe a heart filled with sorrow is a heart that is more open to the grace of God. I think our hearts are more disposed to receive God's grace when we're sorrowful, if we have faith and maintain faith. If we don't, it's just tragedy and despair.
Even in our darkest hours, there was always a hope that somehow God will resurrect our hearts. He will resurrect this situation. And the beautiful thing is that that's really what's happened. When the tragedy happened, and even the healing journey, grief journey that began afterwards, SoulCore wasn't even on the radar then. That was about 3 years prior to when SoulCore began. But when SoulCore came into my life, it was like God kind of gave me this new purpose. And really, he did kind of resurrect that suffering into something very beautiful. And it just kind of shows that all of us have wounds and suffering, and he wants to take all of those and make them new in our lives, and he can, and that's really what SoulCore is kind of a witness to, how he can take suffering and use it for good. Watching others that you love suffer sometimes can almost be more difficult than our own suffering that we have to endure. And again, I go back to the Blessed Mother, that she was a beautiful example. She watched her son die in one of the most horrific deaths, and watched his suffering and people that he loved turn on him. And so she is just such an example of someone we can go to, and through the rosary we can pull out, in meditating on the life of Jesus and the life of Mary and the things that they showed us through their life, we can pull out those virtues of perseverance, of hope, those virtues, and then we can use those in our own life. But I think truly watching like my father suffer and my brother struggle with addiction kind of also always gave myself and my other family members a compassion for those who are suffering, and a compassion for anybody that are making mistakes or bad choices or have things that happen to them, that God can even use those things for good.
Remember, God gave me a grace to understand something that I think only makes sense from the perspective of God and the perspective of faith, and the perspective of the world doesn't really make sense, which is my dad and brother had both struggled with addiction all their life. And thanks God, 4 years before they died, they had given up their addictions. My brother with drugs and alcohol, my dad with alcohol.
My mom's favorite scripture verse was Romans 8:28, which is all things work together for good for those who love the Lord, who are called according to his purpose. And really, I mean, her life was an example of that. Even sometimes when we'd be like, feel a little bit hopeless, somehow God would always resurrect that hope back up and then use it for good. You know, use my brother, for example, when he recovered from his addiction, he ended up giving up his career and he went to work at a homeless shelter that focused on helping men who had drug and alcohol addictions. And that's how he spent the final 5 years of his life.
He was addicted to crack at the end of his life. He got into a car accident a couple years before he finally quit his addiction, and he was almost killed. He had an out-of-body experience where he remembers he fell asleep driving about 55 miles an hour on the highway and hit a truck, and he was helicoptered by lifted to an emergency trauma unit to do emergency surgery, and he was in a coma for those first, I think, 48, 76 hours. But when he came out of that, he came home to heal, and when he was home healing, my mom was taking care of him. He was like a child. He was stuck in his bed, and he got addicted to the painkillers. So when he left there, that addiction to those painkillers eventually cashed out to crack. And then he went for 9 months to an addiction recovery program through the Bible-based recovery. So his conversion was pretty radical. And after that, he realized he can't really live in the world. He needs to live in that formation program. So he gave himself to help others that were like him. And that's how he finished the last 4 years of his life.
So beautiful. He had said to me once that God had shown him such mercy for the poor choices that he had made, that he only hoped that he could show others that same kind of mercy. So I think that suffering really enables us to really have true compassion for others. And compassion means to walk with someone in their suffering. I think that's what suffering enables us to do. And it kind of also chisels away all the non-essentials that we have, the things that we worry about, the things that are important, and we get to the real heart of the matter. My parents actually had lived with me on my property, and they lived actually in a in-law quarters that was built above our garage.
For my parents to move in on the property of my sister was like a dream come true. For the years that they were there, it was a little bit of paradise for our family. My sister Colleen and her husband were blessed to be able to have a property that has like a detached grandparents' quarters, you might call it. And my mom was so pleased to be able to live near her children and her grandchildren and to be able to be with them every day. In fact, they could see each other all the time. Even at night, my mom would look over and sometimes wave goodnight to my niece Emma, and they would wave to each other before they went to bed. It was very idyllic.
It was kind of a hub of family activity and joy and love. And so when my mom died, she was a daily presence in our life. So it was such a vacancy for myself and for my children and the rest of our family. And so then when my dad and my brother died, just those 2 months later, they all died actually in the in-law quarters that was right there on my property. And particularly when my dad and my brother died, I was the one who found them.
She was in her home and she looked out the window and she saw that, strangely, in the late morning, my dad and brother's cars were still in the driveway. So she was just going through her day. She had taken her kids to school. I think she went to Mass and came back home. And then that caught her attention, so she went over to the house. On my end, I was in the parish in the Bronx, Our Lady of the Angels, which was my first parish assignment. And it was in the morning, and we have our usual routine of prayer and Mass and whatever meetings that we have. And I remember I was in my room at the time when I got a call from my sister, and I answered it, and I was completely shocked. She was hysterically talking and almost screaming, and I could hardly make out what she was saying. And all I really heard was, I think they're dead, I think they're dead, oh my God, I think they're dead.
It was truly, for me, the most profound moments of suffering in my life. And it was the heaviest cross, that I ever had to carry. And there was a time, I told my husband right after, I said, I want to move away. I want to, which is our human, I think it's our human, desire that we want to escape suffering and our wounds. And so he said to me, okay, we didn't want to move, but he said, if that's what we need to do, I'll do it. Then I had this inspiration. I feel like we're supposed to do a novena to St. Therese, a 30-day novena. So we started praying that, my husband, and we pulled in some priest friends and some other friends, and we all started praying this novena. And on the 30th day of that novena, a priest friend called me in the morning and he said, last night I had a dream about your property. And over it I saw a great Easter light, and I saw 3 angels in the sky. And he said, I think it's a sign of the resurrection. I think you're supposed to stay there. And a little later in the day, he had called me back and he said, did you read God Calling today, which is a devotional book that my mom had given all of us, including this priest? And I said, no. And he said, go read it. And I read the reflection in God Calling, and it said, such light and love flow out through this home, and you have said it was mine, I will use it. And it said, I may descend some despairing souls here, and you are just to love them and shower them with love. It was a turning point in my grief journey. There was this peace that this is where God wanted us to stay. And even though I was uncertain about the journey of facing the sadness and the grief, that when I was there, even in my house, when I looked out the window, I would look back and I would see the garage and the in-law quarters, and it was like all the memories from that day would come up. It was like the suffering came right back up inside. But I knew there was a peace because I knew God wanted me to stay there. And so we stayed there, and time is a healer, and God's grace is such a healer. But the beautiful thing was that when SoulCore came into fruition, we realized as people were more drawn to SoulCore that we would need a permanent studio to do SoulCore in a permanent space. And one day when I was praying before the Blessed Sacrament in adoration, I just had this inspiration that I think we're supposed to turn the garage space and the in-law quarters into a studio for SoulCore. And I called my co-founder, Deanna.
It just so happened that morning when I received her text message, hey, can you meet this morning? I happened to be coming out of our adoration chapel at our parish. She was coming out of Mass. And, you know, as busy moms, our schedules are all over the place. So the fact that we were in the same place at the same time, at that time when, you know, Colleen asked if I had any time that week to meet, I said, absolutely, I'm actually here, you know, let's do it. So we got in my car and she unloaded like this huge vision. I mean, it's just this vision that had been bursting up inside of her and bubbling and painful almost, because not sure what to do with it. For a workout specifically, but really for deeper prayer, truthfully, is what SoulCore is about. But incorporating the physical component with it. The really cool thing was, and it was just a really amazing time for me, the second I saw Colleen's message, we hadn't talked, I had no idea what she was gonna ask me. My whole body screamed yes. Whatever it was, I knew. The answer is absolutely yes, without a doubt. Not an ounce of me even had a no in there. And then when she unloaded all of her ideas, I still really didn't know what she was asking. So it was still kind of like, the answer is absolutely still yes, but please clarify. What are we doing?
Where are we going to start? So we started that process of transformation physically of that space from garage and apartment to studio. And I knew that obviously the physical space was going to transform. What I didn't know was how our grief would be transformed in that process to so much healing that came, and watching every day the journey of that space transforming. The same thing was happening like inside, you know, in our souls. It went from a place of my deepest suffering, my deepest sorrow and wounds, to a place of light, prayer, and healing. And so many that have come to pray SoulCore there have said this is a place of restoration. There's just something about the space. And to me, what it's a witness of is how God takes the place, this physical space now for me is a physical representation of the resurrection. How God can take something of sorrow and suffering and death, and he gives it new life. And so we just recently, we have a wood wall there, and we just had it adorned with the scripture verse, Revelations 21:5, which is, behold, I make all things new. And our hope is that through SoulCore, that when people come and they pray the rosary, that little by little, God is making them new. You know, he's renewing their weaknesses, their human weaknesses, and helping them grow in virtue. We hope that in that space, and no matter where SoulCore is prayed, that that's always the process, that our souls are being renewed, our bodies are being restored, and he's making us new. It always goes to that even what our thoughts are, that God's plans for us are so much greater than what we could ever think of ourselves.
I'm so happy for Colleen. I have to say, Colleen is an inspiration to me. First of all, she's one of the happiest people I've ever met. She's my sister. I love it. She's so joyful. And so I really believe like the Lord will use her to bring people to himself, but through joy. You know, it could be any apostolate because of her joy radiates and it's attractive. But she's been inspired. I remember her saying, you know, she went jogging one time and praying the rosary jogging, and she's like, she could really concentrate. And she thought maybe we could combine like exercise and prayer.
I think back to the time when I wanted to escape that and move away, and I think then this would never have been possible, this journey with SoulCore and this space of restoration for others. This space is a beautiful, aesthetically a beautiful space. But what's been so incredible is I absolutely do feel the presence of my family in that space. My mom had a great devotion to prayer, and she would often wake up at 4 or 5 a.m. and pray for about 3 hours before her day began, and prayed the rosary often as well. And so prayers, they remain outside of time, and that prayer, that presence was always in that space. There's people that have come into the space, they have said, there's a peace in this space that I have not felt in any other place that I've been. And they don't even know the story. And then what it does is it opens the door for us to share the story of what happened. And often, I think what happens to them is they connect to the suffering, and I think it gives them hope. I think it gives them hope in their own life and sufferings or trials they may be experiencing, that God can take all things and He can use them for good. But I believe that. I believe, just like in our Catholic faith, that we believe in the communion of saints, and that the saints, their presence is all around us and with us, and certainly their intercession is so powerful. And so I do feel like in that space, there's definitely a connection to my family. And I feel like I also honor, their memory and their life. I feel like anything that this journey of SoulCore is really a fruit of how they lived their life, the suffering that they endured and how they lived it. And ultimately, that's really why I'm here, and even why SoulCore is here. And my friend Deanna would say the same for her family, that this is not a fruit of our work, it's a fruit of our family and so many people's prayer and life. And so we're just little instruments that are kind of helping this to move along.